Bibliophiles of the Internet. My name is Adriana and today I'm here to bring you my September wrap-up. I have to say that September was one of my favorite months of 2015 so far. It was so incredible overall, not only in terms of the books that I read, and I did have a fantastic reading month and I read some of my favorite books that I read in 2015 in September, but just in general, great things have been happening left and right. In September, I finished up summer school and I got great grades for those classes I've basically been busting my ass over for the better part of my summer vacation. And then I got a few weeks off to just recuperate and read and relax and hang out with friends and family. And then the regular school year started again, which may not seem exciting, but I am a super duper nerd, so that's a very thrilling time for me. And then I also got a job in September, which is insane. I can't even think about how someone is willing to pay me for something. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, but I'm so happy about it. So like I said, I started my final year as an undergrad. I got a new job and I read some fantastic books. So yeah, I would say that I really liked September. So without any further ado, let's start talking about the books I read in September. The first book I read in September was a graphic novel, and that was Deafo by C.C. Bell. Some people might not feel this way, but I feel very comfortable classifying this as a graphic memoir because it is very deeply embedded in C.C. Bell's truth, by which I mean a lot of the events in this book are directly pulled from her childhood and her experiences as a hard of hearing person. Essentially, this story is about a young girl who, as I said, grows up hard of hearing, and when she goes to school, she has to wear this huge hearing aid that's strapped to her chest. And so it's basically like she has superpowers, she has supersonic hearing, and she can hear her teachers wherever they are throughout the entire school. I absolutely love this graphic memoir. I think it's a must read. It's so fantastic, and the medium of comics as well is such a unique medium through which to tell this story of a hard of hearing protagonist. And I think that visual medium is used very thoughtfully and very successfully. Especially because this graphic novel is geared towards a younger audience, I think it's really smart that it uses that visual medium to give that audience something to grasp onto. Plus, I think it offers some very valuable insight from a perspective that is not nearly as visible as it should be, and it offers hearing people a glimpse into the day-to-day struggles of a hard of hearing person. I could not give this graphic novel any less than the 5 stars it deserves. Next, I read a book that little did I know would eventually lead to my undoing, and that is Captive Prince by C.S. Picot. This is the first book in an adult romance trilogy. I would classify it as low fantasy with a historical fiction feeling to it. Basically, it's about a prince named Damon whose half-brother Castor betrays him, and as soon as their father dies, Damon is stripped of his title and his right to the throne, and he is sold as a pleasure slave to the prince of the enemy nation. Dun dun dun! Before I even get into my thoughts, I have to say that I buddy read both the first and second book in this trilogy with Ivan from Sona Azra, who is amazing, and we had such a great time reading these books together. I have to say, for the first book, Captive Prince, I really liked it, but I didn't love it yet. There were a couple of technical things that I think kept me from outright loving this series right from the start, and the first is the writing style. There's nothing wrong with the writing style, I just don't think there's anything really special about it, at least in this first book. I guess I would say the writing style is nothing to write home about. It's nothing special or unique. It's not lyrical or beautiful or this evocative prose that's going to change your life. It's purely functional. It gets you from point A to point B, and it describes the things that are immediately happening, and that's okay. The other things that kind of bothered me were a severe lack of world building and backstory. I felt like you really didn't get a good grasp on this world in the first book. You really don't know anything about the surrounding nations besides their names and the cultures, but you don't know anything else, and you don't really know about the motives of some of the main characters in this story. Like the most important one, you don't really know why Damon's half-brother Castor would betray him and then send him off to be a pleasure slave for the enemy prince. And yes, the books in this trilogy are told from Damon's perspective, and he's kind of preoccupied in the first book with being sold as a pleasure slave in the first place and trying to survive and trying to keep his identity a secret, but I just wanted more. However, with all of that being said, the dialogue is on point, the characters are on point, the tension is on point, the drama and the political intrigue is on point. And even though the writing style is mostly functional and straightforward, the story itself is very, very addictive. Overall, I was very pleasantly surprised by the first book, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Then later on in the month, Ivan and I also read the sequel, Prince's Gambit. This book was where my love for this series just exploded and compounded on itself and just grew exponentially until it became this monstrous thing that has taken over my life. I feel so many things for Prince's Gambit. It is so essential to my life and my well-being. I just am destroyed by this book, and I feel so many things, like I said, and I can't. The characters grew by leaps and bounds in this installment. The story got so much more complex, and I became so much more invested in this world and in these characters. And I will say that it is really easy to invest yourself in these characters because they're so fascinating and they're so well written. And the awesome thing about this trilogy is that even though it's an adult romance, the first book really has no romance to speak of. The characters are still at odds with one another. They hate each other, and they're still figuring each other out and treading lightly around one another. They're still, for all intents and purposes, strangers. And by this second book, their relationship has really evolved and changed so subtly and so gradually that you can't even pinpoint when the change happened. It's just like moving a pile of sand one grain at a time until eventually it's in a completely different place. Trust me, you have not read a good slow burn romance until you've read the Captive Prince trilogy. Authors, take note. This is how you do a good slow burn romance. This trilogy is a legitimate torture device. It killed me and then it brought me back to life, only to kill me again. C.S. Pecat giveth, and then she taketh away just as quickly, and it's awful, but it's also amazing. In the end, I gave Prince's Gambit 4.5 out of 5 stars, but make no mistake, in my heart, it's really 5 out of 5 stars, and I am not the same person I was as when I started Prince's Gambit, and I just feel like my life has changed for the better. Then I took care of my September TBR challenge, and my challenge this month was to reread a favorite book. So I reread Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Sainz. And I think it's safe to say that this book wins for the most amount of tabs used in a single book ever. Make no mistake, this book is about queer Latinos. Do not trust anyone who says this is a coming-of-age story that's only about friendship. It is about friendship, but it's about so much more. Both of the characters in this book are queer, and they're Mexican-American, and they're figuring out their feelings for one another. Use your eyes. There is a Stonewall Award on this book, and it's not because the characters are straight. Somehow I love this book even more after reading it a second time than I did the first time I read this book. And the first time I read this book was a huge turning point in my life because that was the first time I had seen myself so clearly in fiction, and that moment changed my life. All I have to say is that if you have read this book and you did not love this book, it's because you have not lived this book and you do not understand, and you cannot begin to understand how important this story is and how many things Benjamin Sainz got exactly right and why that is important, and you can't understand how many people really need this story, including myself. Obviously, after a second reading of this book, I gave it the rightful 5 out of 5 stars it deserves. Then I read American Gods by Neil Gaiman. This book is really difficult to explain, but basically it's about a main character named Shadow who did 3 years in prison for assisting in a robbery, and now he's been released a few days early, but not because of good behavior, but because his wife Laura died. So his life as a newly freed man has not gotten off to a good start. So when the story starts, Shadow is a man who has nothing to lose, and he encounters a very strange and mysterious man named Wednesday who enlists him to help in this mythological war that pits the new American gods and powers against the traditional and ethnic gods that immigrants have brought with them from their homeland to America. This is one of those books that does not spoon feed you. This book asks you to trust it from the very beginning and to just relinquish your power as a reader and go along for the ride. The prose is very meandering. You have no idea what all these events mean and how they're going to tie into a greater story, and sometimes you have absolutely no idea where this story is going, but that's what makes it so great, because once it gets you where it wants to get you, it will impress the hell out of you. At its heart, American Gods is a story about how immigrants make up America. We're all from somewhere along our family line. Not many of us are native to this country, and by being from other places, we bring those traditions and beliefs and values to America with us. And by practicing those things in America, we redefine what it means to be American. And that's where this metaphorical power struggle stems from. I love this book, and I love this book knowing full well that some people are going to read it and absolutely hate it for all the same reasons that I love it. Some people are going to despise this book because it's so weird and strange and out there, and it has such a roundabout way of telling a story. Some people are going to read this and they're not going to understand it, or they're not going to want to understand it because they hate it so much, and that's okay. But what you have to understand is that I lived for months with this book by my side. I shared space with this book. I gave a part of myself to this book, and for that reason, and because it tells an incredible and unforgettable story, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. After American Gods, I read Half the World by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second book in the Shattered Sea trilogy, which is a companion of high fantasy novels, the first being Half a King. I really don't have much to say about this book. I really enjoyed it just as much as Half a King. I thought it was very exciting, fast-paced, and entertaining, and overall I thought it was a really great story. The romance in this story did bother me because I found it to be kind of predictable and cliche, and also I was a little bit resentful because the first book is told from Yarvy's point of view and he doesn't have to share with anyone, but as soon as the story is about a female protagonist, the story turns into a dual perspective narrative and she has to share half her chapters with a new character named Brand. So that kind of sucks. Which is not to say that I didn't enjoy his perspective, because I did, and I thought the dual narrative really worked well because it gave a broader scope of the story, so I guess overall I'm okay with that. But like I said, I did enjoy this book, and I look forward to continuing and completing this trilogy with the third and final book, Half a War, and I gave Half the World 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read one of my favorite books that I've read all year, and that is Ancillary Sword by Ann Leckie, which is the sequel to Ancillary Justice, which is one of the best books ever written, just FYI. Long story short, I love this trilogy so freaking much. It very well may end up being the best trilogy I've ever read in my entire life. I really didn't know if Ancillary Sword would live up to the majesty of Ancillary Justice, but this second book blew the first one out of the water, even though they're completely different stories, and this one takes the story in a completely different direction and features new characters and new locations, but still, it was absolutely incredible. The unique perspective that this trilogy offers is what really blows my mind time and time again. Because Breck is an ancillary unit, her narration can emulate omniscience without actually being omniscient, because she has access to so many different streams of consciousness and so much information. She really does give us this full and complete image of the world around her and the characters around her, and that is so amazing. And it's really such a complex perspective to get across, but somehow Ann Leckie manages to navigate it so effortlessly. I could go into detail and talk about this book for like half an hour easily, but I don't have that kind of time. Like I said, long story short, it's absolutely incredible, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. After that, I read George by Alex Gino. This is a children's book about a young trans girl who wants to play the role of Charlotte in Charlotte's Web in the school's upcoming production of that play. I love this book. I think it's so wonderful and important. It's so rare to see a story told from the perspective of a young trans child, and I think this book really does justice to that experience. Also, this book is all about self-love and self-acceptance and how you want to express your true self, so how could I not love that message? This story also does a great job of confronting some very difficult topics in a way that will be very accessible for the target audience. Overall, this book is so important, and I really cannot emphasize how important it is to support and buy books like this and to spread the word about them, and I very, very, very highly recommend this book, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. So those were all the books I read in September. In the comments down below, please let me know if you have also read any of the books I mentioned today, because I would love to know your thoughts. But that is everything I had for this September wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye.